Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of Planetos Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the fans of George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire and HBO's A Game of Thrones. Spoiler warning for all you listeners out there, the show will cover all material, the main series, Dunk and Egg, the novellas, the world of Ice and Fire, quotes and interviews by George, and episodes of the show and its commentaries and bonus material. I'm one of your hosts, Brett. You can find me on Twitter at HomelyPillow.
And I'm your other host, Travis. You can find me at Sir_Travis on Twitter. We hope you enjoy today's show. So today we're going to talk about the Dunk and Egg novellas. And we're really excited about this. These are some really fun stories that George has written. It gives us a unique perspective on an age in Westeros' history where it was fairly peaceful, where the Targaryens were in power. But first, like we have on other episodes of the podcast, we have a special guest, and I'm going to turn it over to Brett to introduce our special guest and then let our guest tell us a little bit about himself and his Song of Ice and Fire story. So Brett, take it away.
Okay, so I could not wait to get this guest on here, especially for this subject. I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on than my friend Ben, or otherwise known as DoctorFumblez, according to your Twitter, right?
Correct, and pretty much any other social media I use. My name's Ben. I go by DoctorFumblez. You can follow me on Twitter at DoctorFumblez07. I got into this series and it was kind of funny. I pushed back for so long with one of our other friends to read these books, and I never could get into the books. I watched the first episode and was like, what's the big deal? Until the last sequence with, of course, Bran catching Jaime and Cersei's getting it on. And then the things I do for love, and he pushes Bran out the window. I was hooked from that point on. I watched all of season 1, straight into season 2, all in one weekend, just rolling through. A job I worked at, I was allowed to listen to headphones. So then that is when I started listening to the audiobooks. So, of course, burned through all the current of audiobooks available and then discovered what we're talking about today with The Hedge Knight. And to me, I don't know if it was because how short and sweet and concise the stories were or just the characters themselves. It's resonated, and it's been my favorite part of this series, bar none.
I have to agree with you, actually, because I just got into them and I freaking love them. I think I've been through them I think I'm on my 6th run through of them right now.
I finished another listen on Friday, so finished the listen on Friday, got married on Saturday. You know, it's been a big weekend here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So
well, congratulations.
You got married yesterday.
Thank you.
So
yep.
Nice.
Fiance is in the other room playing PUBG, so the kind of people we are. So it just works out great.
So Ben, let's stick to you and your story for just a little bit before we jump headfirst into Dunk and Egg. I think what you said was really interesting, and it's something you hear across the fandom. I know it's something that I experienced when I first watched the show. Brett experienced what I call this escalation. Like, you see that moment with Bran, Jaime pushing him, Robert dies, Viserys dies, Ned dies, Dany bursts the dragons. I mean, the White Walkers. It's just like this escalation of events that keeps you intrigued by the series, whether it's the books or the show. So are there some favorite episodes or favorite chapters or characters of the main series that you like? And tell us a little bit about that as well, about the main series, Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones.
With the main series, favorite character, bar none, is Davos.
Nice.
Because he has been thrown into all this, and he really is just like, I'm here. I'm just following. I'm just here. In the books, you see a lot more of it. He's the common sense to, oh man, I'm drawing a blank on Robert's brother's name.
Renly?
No, not Renly.
Oh, Stannis.
Holy
Thank
shit,
you.
Brett. Holy shit.
It made me feel so much better when you didn't pull it out right away too, Brett.
I'm over here having a fucking aneurysm.
But just the way in the books he's portrayed, he is trying to be the common sense to Stannis. I was about to mess it up again, even though we just talked about it. He was the common sense to Stannis that was sorely lacked. Low birth, just very down to earth about everything he does. Very similar to me, I feel like the way Bronn is with Jaime.
Yes.
In the series, and of course Davos has kind of become the unofficial hype man for Jon Snow now in the series. But that character really resonated with me through all his adventures through the book and everything that happens, and especially after the Battle of Blackwater, which was way more awesome in the book than it was in the show, which was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the Battle of, well, first of all, let's back up. Like, our house flies no flags, the American flag or any flag, but we don't fly flags. But if I could fly a flag, it would be the burning heart of Stannis Baratheon. So just I'm glad. I get a sense. I think you like Stannis, but when you forgot his name and then Brett said the usurper Renly Baratheon, like I said, I almost had a killed over. But I think you're right. Like, Stannis is probably my favorite character, but continually I go back to Davos. I think he is. I think it's actually Beefish that kind of describes him. Where Ned is very honorable, right? Everyone looks at Ned Stark as this honorable man. Davos in the books is moral. He's kind of the moral heart of Westeros. He's, he does some bad things, not him personally, but he comments that he's cheated on his wife. He comments that, in war he's killed people before, but he still has a morality that is sorely lacking throughout a lot of the characters. Obviously, the Starks, Jon Snow, share a pretty high sense of morality, but you're right. You get that sense of morality, but also you get this point of view of someone who has risen up very highly, and I think that's a really unique perspective. And I think George probably enjoys that perspective, writing from that perspective, as he himself being someone from a working class background in New Jersey, growing up and everything. So I'm glad to hear that you like Davos. Davos is a great character. What about like a favorite episode of the show? I mean, you talked a little bit about Blackwater. We actually did a episode on Blackwater. I think, like you said, the Battle of Blackwater in the books is so much better, but I personally think that the episode Blackwater remains one of my top episodes of the show so far.
Favorite, it's Hardhome.
Hardhome, cool.
And I couldn't give you one part because I just thought the whole episode was awesome.
It is a good.
What about Mastodon? Them being in that episode.
Oh, well, I mean, that had nothing to do with it.
I know.
Yeah. It was just one of those things where, since I was playing catch up, watching most of the series, there were a lot of episodes that were big episodes that just got really overhyped when I watched.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
Big one for me, The Mountain and the Viper. Everybody talked about how awesome that episode was, but like watching that episode after everyone's talked about it, it was a good episode, but it was still kind of a letdown for me. But Hardhome, everybody told me, "Oh, this episode's awesome. This episode's awesome. This episode's awesome," and still was blown away by it. You hear a lot of people in the fandom talk about how, and I remember watching it, Brett. I think we talked a little bit about it. That episode is so unexpected. The White Walkers just come out of nowhere. The fight comes out of nowhere. You think that's something that you see in that episode, Ben? That it just kind of comes out of nowhere? I think the out of nowhere, and then seeing how quickly, because of course we see the first instance where we start to discover a weakness for the White Walkers, because we've heard, the Valyrian blades are rare, this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden, now we know what can kill these things, which has been a big issue that Jon has been trying to warn everybody about. So we get our first glimpse of that. We see the first moment where the commanding White Walker that Jon takes down in that episode, the first time we see the White Walkers, to me, an emotion of fear is kind of conveyed. Once they realize that, he can actually hurt us. We're not invincible against this sword. Of course, the ending sequence where you see the boats leaving, and all of the fallen people that have been fighting suddenly getting right back up, and you're just like, how do you beat these odds?
Right.
Which is still in the series to this day. How are they going to beat the odds?
Especially in the show, because there's a lot less Valyrian still in the show than there are in the books.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, since it was mentioned this episode, of course, referring more to the show storyline in that one.
And in an early episode of our podcast, Ben, we talked about, some of the pros and cons with the show versus the books. But Hardhome is a great example of where the show took an event that happens off screen in the books. John and the Night's Watch receive a letter from Hardhome. I don't remember which Black brother is there, but he's writing to John saying, a bunch of shit's going down. The show was able to show us that, obviously, from John's perspective, and I think that obviously is an improvement on that event. And a lot of people walk away with that being one of their favorite episodes. So that's great.
Yeah, it's a show only scene that landed amazingly.
And that is very rare as the series has gone on for this show to, in a way, outshine the book, in my opinion.
Right.
Because far too often in the show, an event that you think is going to be really important either gets glossed over or changed so much it's unrecognizable.
Right.
And it's happened a lot more in later seasons since George has stepped away from helping writing a lot of the scripts. To me, pacing in the later seasons has become an issue because it's following a lot more of the more common trend of action, no rest. And I thought a lot of what made earlier seasons good was the tension that was built up for these big events. It made you want to come back and watch another episode.
All right. Brett, you have any further questions for Ben?
I don't know. I probably do, but we'll continue. We'll jump into
in and as we think of things and as the conversation begins. So again, Ben, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being here tonight. Like we said earlier, we're very excited about this episode. This is our first foray into the Dunk and Egg novellas. So today's episode, whenever you're listening, is going to focus on the Hedge Knight, which of course is the first book. And there are three stories: the Hedge Knight, the Sworn Sword, and the Mystery Knight. And those were put together. A lot of people have a collection from 2015 called A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. And I think that's an appropriate title because we're going to talk about knighthood and what does it mean to be a knight in Westeros in this episode. The Hedge Knight was first released in 1998, so that's pretty early on. George started writing this series in 91 to 93. That's when he first started seeing some of those visions of the dire wolves and the snow and developing some of the early characters. So that while he's writing A Game of Thrones, which was released in 1996, A Clash of Kings, which came out in 1998, same year as The Hedge Knight, and of course A Storm of Swords, which came out in 2000, you get a sense that The Hedge Knight was something that was on his mind. It was, George is an expert at laying history and mythology in pieces throughout his stories. And then he'll, as a true gardener, he'll come back and see what he can dig up and use. So the Hedge Knight really fills in a lot of the backstory that begins to really shape Westeros in A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords.
I actually didn't realize that it was published so early on.
Yeah. It was published in a fantasy compendium. I don't remember which one, but George has published a number of these stories in larger collected fantasy stories with Robert Jordan and Ursula K. Le Guin and other authors that are his peers.
I'm glad all of us are struggling with our words today. When you speak of the dates, it is also crazy when the series Game of Thrones is much more of a recent memory thing. Like, why did it take so long for this to take off? When you look back, and A Hedge Knight 1998,
right.
Game of Thrones 1996. If whoever was at HBO that said, "Hey, I got an idea for something. Let's do this." Thank you very much. They're probably looking like they're a genius now.
Right. Yeah. And I think regardless of what you think of the TV series, I think it was David and Dan, the showrunners, that read the books and maybe pitched it to HBO. So it may have not, even been someone inside HBO that was the light bulb went off. It was those guys. So sometimes I think they get some unfair flack. Although I think, like you said, Ben, with some of the later seasons, it's deserved.
I think they just checked out, kind of a little bit. They're ready.
It's got Walking Dead syndrome right now. They don't know what they want to do. They don't know where they want to take it, but they know they still want to make money. So they're having to drag out these events. And to me, I feel like season 5 is when it started to go off the rails.
Oh, definitely.
It still has good moments, but yeah, you could definitely tell like they're checked out.
Yeah,
I think
they're
they're not to get into this argument, but I heard someone recently on another podcast talk about did David and Dan sign up to create within this world? They signed up to adapt. A lot of that lays the blame at George's feet, which I think is unfair, especially when we talk about all of the storylines and character arcs that have to be wrapped up in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring to end this series. I don't envy his position at all, but I do agree there are definite storylines that could have used breathing room. Like, they say that they created the Sept explosion, which I think is a remarkable arc in season 6. That scene is amazing. That storyline is amazing. That was a real highlight. I think that brought back some of the problems with season 6, which I think overall didn't have a lot of problems, but there were several with Arya's storyline and everything. But they created that, so they have the ability to create these cool storylines. They have the ability to draw things out. But we do think, if you listen to some of our earlier podcasts, we do think it's a little bit rushed. But they've been doing this for 10 years, and that's a long time. That's a long time as well. So, all right. So let's get back to the Hedge Knight. So the story begins around 90 years before the events of A Game of Thrones. Dunk is a squire in service to the Hedge Knight, Sir Arlen of Pennytree. And the two of them are traveling to Ashford Meadow in the Reach for a tournament. The book opens shortly after the death of Sir Arlen. He's just died the night before, and Dunk is burying him the next morning. Dunk takes all of the possessions and the horses and decides to continue on to the tournament to participate as a knight. Now, Dunk's goal is to make his place in the world by doing the only thing that he knows how to do, becoming a knight. And we know from the story that Sir Arlen found him on the streets of Flea Bottom and King's Landing and took a liking to him, and he became his squire at a young age. And we come to find out that Dunk has an absolute center about him on what is good and what is wrong, what is a true knight, all of that. Obviously, George's works are told from different perspectives. This story is told directly from Dunk's perspective. And along the way, he meets a young boy who will become his squire and lifelong friend. And that, of course, is Aegon Targaryen. Aegon the Unlikely, who becomes king later on. And we get to meet a lot of members of House Targaryen and many great ancestors of the noble houses we know and love in A Song of Ice and Fire. So, guys, I think the first thing that immediately, when you read The Hedge Knight, when you read the Dunk and Egg novellas, you instantly get a different tone. There's a lot of light moments in the main series, A Song of Ice and Fire. There's a lot of dark moments. But this one, to me, kind of rings like an adventure story, like two guys setting off on a trip on some horses, going to a tournament, meeting people along the way. The weather's great. There's food, there's music, there's banners flying. Everything is colorful. What do you think about the
Dunk and Egg's excellent adventure?
Yes.
One of the first things that sticks out to me is the way what you mentioned about we're picking up right after the death of Sir Arlen of Pennytree. The book immediately mentions, as he's going through his belongings, the size that Dunk is. We're talking about a 16-year-old that it mentions is closer to 7 foot than 6. So immediately you're like, okay, so this is a big boy from the start of it. But it definitely comes across, like you said, it does come off more as an adventure. And I feel like a lot of that happens with the perspective. We're dealing with a 16-year-old, I mean, in these times, a man, boy, whatever you want to call him. So his worldviews are not as cynical and as dark as we see some of the other characters in later stories being at this point.
I describe Dunk's perspective as simple. That's not to say dumb. He has a simplistic view of the world. But I like exactly what you said, Ben, that he's not cynical. He is, he's positive. He is, I also like that you pointed out his size, because I think when you read the main series, the one person that is immense in the main series is Gregor Clegane, and we know he is a terrible human being. So I wonder if purposely George made Dunk as big as he is to kind of play with that sense of, oh, by the way, here's another knight who is of equal size, but is a good person.
I've always felt that was Hodor in the main series, to show you the two extremes in size. But it definitely, I think it goes to show, again, not exactly in his headspace on what he was thinking, but this seems like it was, since it did come out at a similar time to some of the other Game of Thrones books he was writing, maybe his release from the darkness of the series and what he was writing. Of course, in the first couple books, we have the Ned being beheaded, we lose Robert and all that stuff. So maybe this was his way of, I still want to write in this world and build this world, but not be as dark about it.
It's like, this writing's making me depressed, and I need,
Well, the speed that you're writing your books is making me depressed, so nobody can be happy here.
But yeah, I like the similarities, and of course, Brienne is related to Dunk in some way, and I like how they're kind of doing something similar. Well, she's searching for someone, but it's still like kind of like an adventure for her, but she's doesn't have that same mindset either, though.
Right. There's not the weight that Brienne has on her shoulders. But you're right that you do get the sense, and you see why George which Brienne is introduced in A Clash of Kings, and as we said, this came out the same year as A Clash of Kings. So I think he purposely probably developed both of those characters. We think that Hodor is also related to Dunk from Bran's vision of Dunk around the Winterfell pool. This is just me throwing it out there. Are the Cleganes in any way potentially related to Dunk?
I mean, the only evidence is their size.
All right, so like we said, we feel this is like an adventure story. It's a journey over hills and across streams and through meadows. There's, the sun is described as in its glory. You've got shooting stars. It kind of reminds me, and we compare, and George does this himself, and obviously the fandom does, but this is a lot like The Hobbit set against The Lord of the Rings, that The Hobbit is very light fare. Yes, there's some dark elements in there, and there's kind of a shadow in The Hobbit when you read about what's going on in the background, but doesn't necessarily affect the main story of The Hobbit. But that shadow eventually becomes the plot to The Lord of the Rings. So I see the Dunk and Egg novellas kind of like George's The Hobbit, just a fun adventure, a group of people setting off across the world on a mission. But you're right. I think, Brett, what you said, Brienne is a great example of a potential Dunk storyline within the context of A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
And going back to what you just mentioned with the Hobbit comparison there, I really feel like a Hedge Knight, you don't get the sense of the shadow overlaying until, really right there at the end. But it is definitely more prevalent in the Mystery Knight, with the unrest and everything going on, and a much bigger precursor.
Right.
Yeah.
The Hedge Knight is a lot like a prologue. I see it kind of like a prologue, and this is a stupid comparison, but this is kind of what I thought. I'm sure both of you have seen Tim Burton's Batman and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. And those characters are introduced. They fight a villain, and then at the end they both have those scenes where they kind of take on the mantle of their superhero status, and they're going on to save the world, protect New York City or Gotham or whatever. I kind of get that sense at the end of the Hedge Knight where all of this political intrigue and all of these machinations that happen at the tournament kind of come on Dunk when he is arrested and then released and fights. And
that you mentioned Egg, and I love how they describe that his nickname is basically because he has a bald head,
yep.
And it's shiny like an egg,
right.
And also going back to him being a Targaryen, which is not something we learn until later, you definitely see the brashness of the Targaryen lineage by being, are you the stable boy? I might be, there's some of the lines he's just like, I don't care that you're 7 foot tall and I'm 8 years old. I don't care. You're not going to tell me what to do.
Right.
Granted, he does it, but later on they find out for the selfish reason he wanted to be on the war horse wearing the chainmail and stuff. So
it is funny because he tells him to do it and then he does it and he doesn't have to do it.
Under no obligation to do any of this stuff, but whatever, he did it anyway.
And I love, I love Daron.
You're no knight. You're no knight.
Yeah,
I know all the good knights in Westeros.
I love Daron too. I freaking love him. He's hilarious, especially when he's later on in the books when he's talking about Arian. It's a shame he wasn't born a Fossaway, because then he'd think he was an apple and we'd all be a great deal safer, or whatever that comment he makes.
Yes.
Another interesting, sticking with the conversation on the tone and the themes of the Hedge Knight, it's interesting that the seasons are instrumental also in this story. Obviously in the main series, the seasons are out of whack. We come to find out that it's in the terms of what we understand as the seasons are out of whack. That's the end of a long summer in the main series, coming into autumn, and obviously we're getting into winter now in the main series. But in this book, it's spring. It opens with the spring rains. The soil is really wet. There's flowers in blooms. The trees are swaying. Again, you get that image of Westeros kind of at its height, if you will. That everything is peaceful. It smells good. Everything is rich, and they focus on the dragonflies, which I think is interesting in the breeze. And you get the sense that life is good in Westeros right now, especially in the sense of this story. Like we said, there's no shadow that it doesn't emerge until the end.
And that's that you kind of make a good point about this one being a prologue, because that tone switches a little bit, because you have Baelor and then I forget the king, but everyone thinks the realm is safe in the hands of Baelor Breakspear. He dies, and then that's when the story kicks off.
Right. And this is also this is like a story that old Nan would tell Bran, right? Or would have told Robb and Jon when they were kids at Winterfell.
It sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
she was alive when all this was going on.
Right, but what I mean is the story itself. This is like a story that old Nan could tell anyone at any time, regardless of whether she would have known about it or met Dunk or whatever. But it just feels like one of those stories that potentially Sansa would open a book and read about. Yeah, exactly. They would idolize these characters. Robb and Jon, sparring through Winterfell, they would, one of them might take on the mantle of Sir Duncan and fight with their partner, their brother throughout. So, this is a simpler time, a simple story, which again opens to a much darker tone as the novellas progress and as we get into A Song of Ice and Fire. So let's talk some about the themes. Chivalry is very important in this story. And chivalry obviously is a code of virtue, and that's something from our own history. And we know that in Georgia's story, the Andals bring a sense of chivalry and a social order with them to Westeros. And there's a bunch of different aspects to chivalry. First of all, there's honor and justice, protecting the weak and defending the innocent. That's something that Dunk embodies through and through. There's bravery and courage. We know that We know that Dunk. Yeah, I'm getting drunk. Yeah. We know that Dunk is brave and he's courageous. So is Egg. Like you said, Ben, he has no sense to step back against the 7-foot man and not say something. Oath keeping is important. Again, that ties into Brienne in the Song of Ice and Fire. And then nobility and piety. So that's when I was talking about the social order. Nobility is a social structure, right? That noble families and lords and ladies are important to the social order. And knights in a chivalrous society they have to uphold that system. And that's really going to play out and affect Dunk throughout these novellas. Piety is obviously a faithfulness, a religious belief. And obviously that's important within the story. Then there's the warrior ethos, the sword and shield and warhorse and training. And then finally, that what rounds out chivalry is morals and customs, that knights, a knight like Dunk would try to uphold these morals and customs of Westeros.
And many knights don't uphold that.
No, they don't at all.
They're pieces of shit.
Mentioned early, a hedge knight without honor is no better than a robber is something Arlen Appenitree tells Dunk, and it's kind of just engraved into his brain when he goes to it. Going back to this, I think Dunk is the perfect candidate when you're talking about knighthood, because he does not see the world as gray at this point. He sees very black and white. It's good and bad. There's not an in-between, which many characters in literature, as this story develops, he does start to see that it's not as black and white as everything seems. But he is always the last one to the party to realize that. As seen, I think we were talking about earlier with the, as you see in Sworn and Sword, he fought for the king, blah, 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 find out, wrong king. Oh, yeah, everybody knew that, but you Dunk. Way to pay attention. Way to pay attention to your context clues there. He wants to be brave, and I really feel like Dunk has that father admiration towards Sir Arlen and doesn't want to do anything that would disappoint him or bring any dishonor to Sir Arlen's name, even though Sir Arlen's name only really exists in Dunk's mind, as we find out later in this story.
Yep.
That's a good point. That is a really good point.
All right. So glory. Glory is also a theme within this story. Obviously Dunk wants to become a knight, but he wants to win as well. He wants to win the tournament. He wants to show people that he's capable. It's not just that it's being right and being a knight and being honorable, but he wants the glory, right?
Yes.
Well, one thing he mentions is he never intends to, when he goes in this tournament, he never intends to win the tournament. He constantly says, I just need to win one match.
One match.
Because that in his head, if he can win one match, it'll give him the money to survive. So I don't know. Glory maybe, but to me it almost feels like the only thing he knows how to survive is being a knight, because he's been a squire for so long, and then he sees this tournament as his way to, if I win here, I can keep surviving. Like one win here may turn into another win somewhere else, and that could be the way he makes his money. Or I think he also mentions a good showing means that he may become a house knight for one of the lords that'll be in attendance. So I can see the glory because he is a younger man, and that's probably the reason, instead of saying, well, I can go find a job somewhere and earn money, he's like, I'm going to go in this tournament, I'm going to show off, and that's going to be what gets me money. So that might be, glory might be the reason he goes for that, but he also, again, going to the very simple, he's also very realist. He knows, I just got to win one.
Right.
Well, and yeah, I think he's sitting there watching the knights joust and fight, and he's like, I think he thinks to himself, like, he it's something along the lines of like he wasn't gonna pretend to think that he had as good of a seat as these other knights, but he was thinking like I could probably win a couple matches due to my size.
Yeah, he knew
On
once
foot.
he got off the horse and it became melee that it was all hits because
Right.
no one could match him size and strength.
So that's like one of those. He was kind of a bit of a realist, but then you see what
A
happened.
realist would have not walked into a tournament and is like, I'm going to enter this tournament.
Yeah.
Realist would have been like, where's the nearest farm that I can look hay from so I can get a warm meal?
That's true. That's true.
All right, so I think there's also a theme of heroism, especially in the context of what's the Dornish girl's name? Tansel?
Tanzel too tall.
Tanzel too tall, but not too tall for me.
Obviously, I think Dunk wants to be a hero and save her. Egg wants Dunk to be a hero in that, and then I think Tanzel looks upon him as a hero as well. I think this is similar, though, as you said, Ben, with Glory. I don't think Dunk sets out to be a hero, but I think the events of this story lead him down the path of glory and of heroism.
Yeah, he didn't think it through knocking out a son of the king, knocking a tooth loose. It was just a reaction thing going back to as we said earlier, he sees things black, white. What Aaron was doing was wrong. He wanted to right that wrong. And thus begins the terrible machinations and events that become the end of this book.
Right.
But definitely there's an image that they mention during the scene you're speaking of where Aaron is basically just destroyed all the puppets, all the market. How Martin describes him breaking Tanzel's finger to me sticks out in this scene particularly because it was one of those things where I think if that moment didn't happen, I think Dunk may be able to sit back and be a realist about what's going on. But it's almost like he's hearing the screams, you hear the crunch, and the next thing you know, he's going through 2, 3, 4 dudes to get to him, and then knocks him down and just kicks him. You know,
it kicks him again and again.
And again.
Okay, so
what I'm assuming is probably like a size 16 boot of some sort, just stomping a mud hole in him.
Now, did you listen to the Harry Lloyd version of the audiobook? Okay.
Yes.
It is great, like hearing him read Arian's dialogue because it just sounds like Viserys. Like he just does the Viserys voice.
And the way he also does the vocal performance also in a lot of these audiobooks, since you mentioned that, is phenomenal. Roy Dotrice was amazing, I thought, in the first 3 audiobooks. I think there was a layoff before he recorded the 4th one, and I felt like he lost a lot of his character voice.
Yeah, he switched them. He switched them.
Yeah. Well, I know there was a long time between the recordings, so there was a lot of enunciation that was different. And Roy Dotrice also ended up playing, going forward, Aemon, didn't he? Wasn't?
No.
He was the pyromancer.
Okay, I knew he was.
He
was somebody.
He wanted to play Pycelle, right? And then,
yes, he did.
And then due to health reasons, he didn't get the role. But then they.
Right.
But yeah, no, I hope hopefully Harry Lloyd comes back for T-Wow and Dream of Spring. Maybe they'll bring him on. I don't know. Or the guy who plays
Jorah reads.
That
guy who played Jorah Mormont reads some of the books by George.
Yeah,
Dying of the Light and others. I think.
I like him too. So
yeah, he's got a good voice. I think another theme within, and this goes back to our discussion about Davos, that there's a real working class. There's a hard work, hard scrap theme about Dunk that, Dunk has always had to work harder than the others around him. He's lived a hard scrap life on the streets of King's Landing and in Flea Bottom, which I think gives him a sense and knowledge of the world that others don't possess. But it's also interesting, like you said, Ben, that he views the world in black and white. I wonder if that's partially because he's been with Sir Arlen for so long that he's escaped that world of King's Landing, if you will, and he's been on the road of service and knighthood, that he has a different perspective than what he may have had he lived his entire life in King's Landing. What do you all think about that?
Most definitely, because everything we hear about anyone that comes from King's Landing, especially Flea Bottom, was Bronn from Flea Bottom?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, he was?
So
I didn't know that.
Well, I think he is in the show for sure.
yes.
Oh.
Well, again, I'll flip back. I have watched the show a lot more than I've read all the books multiple times.
That's fine. You can
yeah.
you can use either for your basis of
Yes.
evidence. So,
but in this case, we'll use Bronn from the show. He doesn't care if it's right, if it's wrong, whatever it is. If it gets him where he needs to be, he's going to do it. Prime example in that in the show, the trial by combat in the Vale. He knows if he helps Tyrion get out of there, he's getting paid. So he's going to get paid. And then everybody says he fights like a coward because he dodges a dude wearing full mail and then proceeds to beat his ass because mobility will beat out strength most of the time.
right.
Going back to the Viper in the Mountain, bringing everything full circle on that one. But yeah, I feel like if he had been left, because it does mention at a point in this book that Dunk doesn't remember his mother and father, and he doesn't have much recollection of his time before Sir Arlen. So I feel like Sir Arlen is where he sees his viewpoints.
Right.
But as we see later in the series, when push comes to shove, there are still some survival instincts that were taught in Flea Bottom that will come out anytime that Dunk is in danger.
No, I completely agree because every time, I mean, basically every fight is like he forgets.
Dunk is outclassed in every fight, and then next thing you know, he goes, "Oh wait, I'm big, I'm strong. I'm gonna beat the fuck out of this dude with my fist, with a shield, with whatever I can get my hand on."
Yeah.
He just doesn't care. He doesn't care.
He does not. He does not.
It's just funny. He forgets. He just forgets all his training, and then
all the time. He forgets it all the time too.
Yeah.
It is a frustrating thing about Dunk, but again, as you said earlier, Travis, he's simple, but that didn't mean he was stupid.
Right.
But it's one of those things where you can tell he probably has some sort of anxiety disorder when push comes to shove, and he's like, I don't know what to do. But then instinct kicks in, and he comes out on most of the time. He comes out on the other side okay.
Right.
Little worse for wear, but okay.
He's kind of a dick to Egg too.
Well, let's be real honest. Egg asked for it a lot.
but it's anytime Egg will say something and Dunk feels stupid, he's he just has he just always
I'm gonna clap you in the ear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what happens when you're big and strong and people make you feel dumb. You just know you can beat them up, so you have to threaten them with physical violence.
Well, I think this next theme kind of ties into how he thinks of Egg, and that's humility. We know Dunk is pretty humble, but at the end of the book, he is given the option of joining the household at Summerhall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he chooses to remain a hedge knight. And he does that because, one, I think he wants to stay a little humble, and he enjoys this life. But he also wants to teach Egg the value of the road, the value of humility, the value of service.
Yeah. And
seeing the small folk of Westeros, which obviously becomes very imperative and informative to Egg's reign as king, because we know Egg puts a lot of the nobility, a lot of the lords and ladies into a tizzy when he proposes a lot of reforms for the small folk during his reign.
I think
humility is a theme.
I think going around to that too, the vibe I got from that ending segment is he was wanting to accept the land thing, but with Egg wanting to be his squire, seeing Aaron and all the other Targaryens and how out of touch with the common folk, he was like, I want to do that, but I feel like you need to let me make Egg grow up first.
Yep.
which shows wisdom way beyond the 16 years
Right.
Dunk is in this story. That's how I've always felt about that, kind of that closing thing where it's what he's always wanted, but seeing what has transpired feels like Egg needs a little seasoning before he's sitting at court and doing things like that, because Dunk's firsthand seeing that the nobility have no idea what it's like for the small folk.
Right.
Yeah, and I think he well, one, I don't think he likes Makar very much. I mean, for good reason, but no, but he does tell Makar, it's going to be, at least for a couple years.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, he wants to buy his time or something like that.
But it is funny though, like how like every time Dunk has his little like, I think it was in like the second or third one. He's like, every once in a while, Prince or Egg becomes princely, but like really, he's just like, I just want a bed to sleep in. I'm tired of sleeping on the ground.
Yeah. Princes
like,
have beds.
Yeah.
Squires don't. Deal with it.
Yeah. And then he's like, I'm tired of salt beef. And like that, it's like
I
he
can
just
just
wants
imagine
real
Dunk
food.
being like, "Oh, I was born in the darkness. I didn't see the light till I was a man."
Yeah.
You're like 8 years older than him. There's not as big an age difference as you want to make it out to be.
It's just funny. It's like, I don't think that's being very princely. I think he just wants some real food. Like,
and I'll speak to this, man. If he's shaving his head out in the heat, I was out in the sun for 3 hours yesterday for my wedding. My head is fried.
You should have had the straw hat.
I should have. There is nothing worse than having no hair up here and it just burning. And it's just like, that would make me act a little princely if I just wanted some shade, a bed, some water, the things that princes have.
Right. There's also a theme of, and we don't need to talk too much about this because we've already focused on it a little bit, with the social injustice, the fact that someone like Aeron Targaryen can walk up to Tanzel and the other commoners, the other small folk, destroy their belongings, destroy what they're doing, break their fingers, all of that, that Dunk really pushes back against. And obviously that's a theme throughout A Song of Ice and Fire proper as well. And then, of course, there's the good versus bad, which is a very simplistic way of saying that, George in this story, and again, we've talked about this being a bit of a prologue that becomes darker as it progresses in the novellas. But he makes Dunk an intrinsically good character. And you get a sense that there are a lot of good and bad characters within this story. Obviously, that gets more complex as the story progresses in the Hedge Knight and then with the rest of the novellas. But Dunk does lie. I mean, he does fib that he was knighted by Sir Arlen. But obviously, we see that not necessarily as a bad thing because we know that Dunk checks the boxes on what a knight should be.
Yeah, well, and it's just implied though, because it's
right.
Yeah, because I think at one point Egg comes and visits him after he beats the hell out of Arian, and then he has that one like off the wall thought, and it's like he knew it was somewhat like it was something along the lines of he knew what it was like to want something so badly he would tell a monstrous lie.
Right.
Yeah, it's a bonding point for him and Egg.
Yeah.
At that point, I really think that is why Egg made it as far along as he did with Dunk. Going back from he left the inn, the tavern, because we never even mentioned Darian having the vision of.
Oh yeah, he dreamed
Dunk.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. But he leaves the inn on a caravan, finds where Dunk was, and when Dunk comes back and hears Egg's story, he goes, "That was me in Flea Bottom," And of course, Egg also tells us another big fig here saying that he is from King's Landing.
Oh yeah.
Which Duncan immediately assumes Flea Bottom, which wrong,
Yeah.
very wrong. Yeah, and like I said, he does check all the boxes, and I think in his head the justification comes from Sir Arlen was going to do it eventually anyway. He just passed away before he could, kind of thing. Because I agree with you. I think he even says he tells other people it was with his like dying breath that it happened. So interesting way of him looking at an interesting viewpoint he takes on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
I get the sense.
Oh, it could have been one of those things too. He was going to do it, and maybe he died before he was able to actually do it. You know.
Yeah, I get that sense too. That Dunk. I mean, he literally wakes up and rolls over, and Sir Arlen's dead, and it's unexpected. And
I had a dream united me, and you're dead, so I'm just going to say it happened.
Right. So another theme within the story, and I think it becomes a more prominent theme in the later books, is friendship. This is the formation of the Dunk and Egg friendship, which is a really powerful coupling, a really powerful friendship overall in George's world of Westeros.
It shapes a lot of future events and puts Dunk in the position to be a big historical figure. Because I do believe it mentioned that Sir Barristan the Bold got his nickname from Dunk when he unhorsed him in a tournament.
Yes.
Wow. I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Going way back. I don't think they mentioned Duncan by name in the when Sir Barristan's telling the story, but it is the basically the leader of the King's Guard, which is Dunk at the time, because Barristan is entering the list while Aegon is king. So it's all put together that way.
Huh. That's cool.
Sir Barristan Selmy is one of my favorite characters in the show. Just got dunked on. They shit the bed so bad on that one.
I think my brother had the same complaint too. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah. Like, yeah, they could have handled that better. But
Yeah.
Another theme within the story is guilt. Guilt runs through how all of George's works and characters. But there's that really amazing scene between Prince Valar Targaryen when he looks at Dunk and says, "The wrong person died today." Why should a prince, a hand of the king, someone destined to be king himself, die instead of a poor hedge knight?
And Dunk deals with this through the rest of these novellas and probably onward. As we hear him talk and speak of this more. But in the grand scheme of things, we see in this instance why it had to happen the way it did, going with if Baelor doesn't die, Egg has no chance of becoming king further on down the line. I know there's a lot of other things that roll into motion of that. If Dunk is dead instead of them, Egg doesn't have anyone to teach him the right or wrong.
Right. That
eventually becomes the unrest with the Targaryens and the other people, which creates a song for fire of ice and fire as it rolls forward. So it's kind of, we can see the ball on how it's rolling after the fact. Of course, nobody at that point in time is going to see it, but it is. Yeah, it is a big event, and even I think Dunk mentions, would it have been worth it for me to lose a hand and a foot? I could have lived without those if Baelor was around to run.
And I don't think he could have lived without those. And
he's 7 foot tall. There's no way he's walking on one foot ever.
Yeah. He reminds me of like Spider-Man from Captain America: Civil War, when he's like, I just want to look out for the little guy. Like that's what he's doing.
Right.
And he's
until the little guy's the reason Aunt May gets shot, and then he's got to put the mask back on and kill somebody. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read Civil War yet, but it's way better than the MCU.
I have not read that thing, but now I kind of want to.
You definitely, if you have not read Civil War, highly recommend you do that.
Another theme within the story is, George's famous kinslaying and kingslaying. We know that Maekar Targaryen accidentally kills his brother.
That's right. Can't see me.
Accidentally. And then obviously Dunk's trial overall results in the death of Baelor, and obviously Baelor's children blame Dunk basically as a kingslayer. So, those are all accidental, they're indirect, they're not direct.
This isn't like Jamie slitting the king's
Right.
throat.
Exactly. Or Jamie strangling his cousins.
Right.
So, any thoughts on the kinslaying and the kingslaying theme?
I feel like Makar, he's not that bad of a dude. He reminds me of like Red from that '70s show a little bit. Where he's like, I'll just
put a
put
mace in the back of your head instead of foot up your ass.
Yeah. He kind of just his two older sons shamed him, and he's all about the he wants his sons to do good, and then Dunk just said something about Aryan. The only meat Aryan ever ate was thick and rare and bloody or whatever, and basically
no, I don't think Arian's ever spent a night on the road, or Daron's ever spent a night on the road.
And then he says Aryan. He says something with Aryan after. But I think he just said like the right thing to that guy. That if that event had never happened, Makar would have laughed in his face, and he's like, "No, I'm taking Egg back to Summerhall."
And you've insulted me, now I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
Makar to me definitely seems like he's just the entrenched nobility, is the way I look at him. Whereas Baelor tried to be the champion for the common folk because he wanted equality amongst everyone, which is why he was so beloved by the people. Makar definitely seems like, I am Targaryen, I am here, you worship the ground I walk on. But the events of the tournament, the trial, and stuff like that, and then, like you said, Dunk just saying the right combination of words after recent events just clicked with Makar, and he saw it through a whole new light. And
right.
If Baelor isn't killed in the trial, I don't think Makar is as receptive to Dunk's words as he was then.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I kind of get flashes of like Stannis with Makar.
I
was actually just going to say that I actually see Stannis' two halves as Baelor and Makar. That he floats back and forth sometimes between, the quotes of "Let's make new lords" to Davos, back to "This throne is mine by rights." Like, he can see nothing else. So I think that's a really good point, Brett. That there is definitely some Stannis, and I think maybe Makar is kind of the Stannis of A Clash of Kings and early A Storm of Swords, and I don't think he's as good. I mean, again, we love Stannis here, but I don't think he's as good as Baelor Breakspear. He's not thinking, of trying to lift up the small folk, but I think that if he was able to, he probably would. So I think that's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, you could tell Makar he's a prince. He wants to be worshipped like a prince, but he like tells Dunk like we can. Before Baelor dies, like he's like, why would you joust with the hedge knight? Right. Keeps like saying that crap, and then Dunk says that to him. He's like, I'm just a hedge knight, and he's like, that could be changed. And you could already see kind of a change in him.
Right. And then I think one of the final themes of the story is, this bittersweet ending. In any other story by any other author, Dunk would be, he's obviously a big guy. It would take a huge crowd to hoist him up, but he'd be hoisted up. There'd be banners flying. Tanzel would be kissing him. He would receive this large bag of money. He would now be a knight. He would be knighted, all this stuff. It's bittersweet. He wins. Our hero survives.
Half of his team died too.
A lot of people have died, and Westeros is, like you said, Ben. Westeros has changed forever because of that.
It's a common thing, like you said, in anything Martin writes. There is no complete victory. There is always a high cost that has been paid for a win or anything that occurs. There's always some sort of, even if it's just a trade deal or a treaty, there's a huge compromise that handcuffs one side. So it's like, oh yeah, we're not going to get attacked, but we can't have our forces here, which would be the place where we could see any attack that they're going to throw at us. One of the saddest things I think in this is the imagery you hear with him riding thunder. Thunder almost falling and him just screaming up and the Warhorse coming up, and then them bringing that back around for when they remove Balor's helm, sorry, and his brain falls out the back of his head.
Yeah.
The imagery used, again, a very descriptive. You knew exactly what happened without him saying the word brain.
Right.
You knew it.
Yeah.
But him catching him and holding him and yelling up, going back to that simplistic view that he has. He doesn't have all the words, but when instinct kicks in, it's just what happens. Taking a step back, him having to sell Sweetfoot.
And he never comes back for it. It bothers me.
No, probably because he wanted to get as far away from where he saw some dude's brain fall out of his head. Because I'm pretty sure I would never visit that town again, ever. But yeah, he never comes back for Sweetfoot, and Steely Pete, who was a great character in this story as well.
I liked it. I liked his description. He's like,
I just imagined like some dude running around like just with his pants on and like Tom Selleck chest hair.
Yeah. And
like, I just imagined a bald Tom Selleck running around.
And he described him as like basically he's jacked, but he's like I think he said he was no bigger than like 5 foot tall.
Yeah, he's just tiny jacked dude with chest hair. So like this, just a great thing. And talking he's one of the ones that also kind of helps get across Dunk's size as well. Talking about like, you're a big lad, but I've armored bigger. Yeah. And I always loved how he was like, I make helmets that are helmets, not fancy. He's the Dunk of armorers. No frills about him. Right. He's like, I think he says, if you take a lance to the face, my steel will stop it.
And you see that later on in the third one.
Yeah, you do.
So he wasn't bullshitting, you know.
Yeah, he's also very proud, which is another thing that is presented through a lot of the characters in this story. He refuses to sell any armor that he does not make. Mm-hmm. If it's not his work, he won't sell it. Which you hear about in the offer he makes to Dunk. He's like, I'll take the steel, and if I can use it to make something else, I'll knock some pricing off the armor you're looking for. Yeah. But refuses to put anyone's work that's not his own out for sale.
The Fossaways are interesting too. I really like.
Stefan is a jerk.
He's a dick. Like,
hold that thought. Hold that thought on other characters because we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
I want to move into talking a little bit more about Dunk himself. I want to come back here in a minute because I want to wrap up this podcast with the question of what does it mean to be a knight? Because I think this is what this story is trying to answer. We know George is working on that in A Song of Ice and Fire as well. Mm-hmm. But let's come back to that because I think that's an important question to consider in the context of this. And we've already talked a little bit about it. But let's talk about how Dunk compares to other characters across George's works. He shares a lot of similarities. We've already talked about some of those, being his size. He's huge, right?
Yeah.
So, like we said early on, you instantly think of Hodor and Gregor and Sandor and Brienne. He's honorable, right? That brings the image of Brienne to mind. Is he a good warrior? Do you think of him in terms of like you would think of a Jaime Lannister?
I do not, because you never hear about him outskilling any opponent he ever comes up against. It's always his size and strength that wins him the fight. So from a fighting standpoint, a warrior standpoint, I also feel the same way about Gregor. He's never shown to be a fantastic warrior. It's always he's 3 times the size of who he's fighting. And like going back to the Viper in the Mountain, the whole fight you hear, it's, Viper's trying to death by 1,000 cuts, makes one slip and over, done, completely out of it.
When the Viper has the skill to kill him, like he could have done that probably instantly.
I definitely think he could if he wasn't, again, another theme that we see a lot of the times is pride. He wanted him to admit that he was his killer, and since he wasn't doing it, he was going to keep him alive longer. If he had just,
and obsession, like not only pride but obsessed. Like we have an episode on
we did,
the Martells are obsessed. That's 20 years ago. I mean, I get you want justice for your family and everything, but man, you've waited a long fucking time to get that justice.
The statute of limitations on your justice has run out. We are sorry, but
it's funny because it's the same thing in Dunk and Egg when they keep talking about blacks or reds, like who'd you fight for about the Black Fire Rebellion. And Dunk keeps going, it was 16 years ago. Like,
I don't care. I was not alive. I don't care what color dragon you flew.
Right.
Pay me.
So, another characteristic of Dunk, as we've said before, it's not a dumb perspective. It's a simple perspective. He's optimistic about the world. He believes in the songs and stories of knights and damsels in distress. And it really reminds us of Bran and Sansa and Arya and Brienne to an extent in the beginning of the story, where they believe the songs and everything. And I think one of the interesting thing is Sansa's point of view in a Game of Thrones at the Hands tournament, where she gets this real world view of, oh no, this is what some tournaments are like with Gregor Clegane and others. Dunk kind of has that view as he's watching and participating in this tournament.
Yeah, it's all fun and games till somebody dies.
Right.
Or a horse gets cut in half. Things like that kind of change your viewpoint on things. I think the Sansa viewpoint is probably the best viewpoint. Like you mentioned, it's Sansa pre-Ned getting his head chopped off. Because even up until the point where Joffrey executes Ned, she still has hope that he's a good guy and he's going to do the right thing and let her father live. And then we completely... And I think at that point is when we see the Sansa flip. Right there, she's like, oh, rainbows and butterflies and nice things. And then she's like, the world is terrible. Everything sucks. And then eventually she gets back on her feet and it's like, all right, I'm in a position to do things. Let me do the things I need to
do. It kind of reminds me of Quentin's storyline where he's just all like, I'm the hero. But like, obviously Dunk doesn't think that, but like how lightly he's taking everything. And then it ends horribly for him. But it's a good thing Dunk and Egg is the tone is not the same because Dunk's.
If the tone had been the same as A Song of Fire and Ice, Egg would have caught some spring fever and died in Dunk's arms right after Dunk was revealed to be correct.
Yes.
He's justified, but now everyone's dead. Spring fever has spread to everyone, and Dunk's going to walk away as the only survivor.
Yeah.
Right.
Because everything you love dies in A Song of Fire and Ice.
Right. Another characteristic that Dunk shares, and I think one of the characters in A Song of Ice and Fire that he most likely shares it with is Jon, that he's alone in the world. Even when he's surrounded by people, he's alone. He's set apart from people. He's not part of the nobility. I mean, we know Jon, even as a bastard, is somewhat part of the nobility, but Dunk is alone in the world.
Dunk doesn't seem too bothered by that, though. Most of the time, until
in the first story, he does not seem bothered by that.
Until he's got to find champions, but yeah.
Well, when he realizes he knows no one. But again, I think it's one of those things where Dunk's in the first story, I think a lot of his size is what sets him apart because he's an intimidating figure to most of the common folk until he's the champion and everybody's coming to him and stuff like that because he stood up for Tanzel. But then after this, the constant whispers of what Valar said, it should have been you. You should have been the one that died. And a lot of people are kind of like, don't want to associate with somebody that probably doomed our kingdom.
Right.
So, yeah. Now mentioning Jon and bringing that up, he's pre-Night Watch Jon when he still has that viewpoint of the Night's Watch is a noble thing. I'm going to go do it because it's a noble thing. And then you get there, it's rapists, murderers.
Right.
This, that, and the other. Before he finds out that the Night Watch is nothing more than a glorified jail cell.
It makes sense because I guess that's probably why he didn't accept the, Maekar's offer to go back to Summerhall. And he thinks to himself, he's like, before all this,
that's all I would have wanted.
Yeah. And then he's like, now that all this has happened, I don't know. It scared him.
He has a different viewpoint because he sees that nobility is only in it for themselves, not for the greater good. And that's, I think, part of what pulls him away from taking Maekar's offer.
Yeah. Because of this, I I had to Google and YouTube real jousting, and it is terrifying.
Also, there was a show on a few years back. I want to say it was on Spike TV where they did these jousting competitions.
Yes.
Do not remember the name of it, but I remember sitting and watching it every week that it was on. It was like Ultimate Fighting Championship, because they would like have all the dudes in the house at the same time talking this, that, and the other. But it was, oh, now we're going to go out and get on these horses and hit each other with big ass wooden sticks.
it looks freaking painful though, like the impacts. And then I looked up a melee.
The sound you hear isn't the poles slamming into each other; it's the balls they have clanging together. That's what you're hearing.
Yeah, and then you're falling off a horse that's running pretty fast, and you're in that armor, and you're hitting the ground. Yeah, that would hurt like hell.
Yeah,
like all stages of that. I think the final characteristics, and we've already talked about these, is he's a commoner from Flea Bottom, and people look down on him. They don't value his abilities or his intelligence, much like Davos. And he's had to fight his whole life. He's had to scrape a living. And like you said, Ben, he's got some intrinsic memory probably of those days and nights on the streets when he fights. But he really relies on just his size and his brute strength to defeat his foes. So again, we've compared him a little bit there to Braun. Braun, obviously, I think is a lot smarter. Not smarter than Dunk, but he's more clever in the way that he fights.
Braun has a skill that is usually more skilled than his opponent, and instead of, as we were talking earlier about being nice and honorable, Braun doesn't care.
Right.
He's there to win and win at all cost. Talking about the size and strength thing, the moment in the trial where he pulls Aaron off the horse, literally so he cannot hit him with his mace. Because he's like, once you're on the ground, you can't swing your mace. And then proceeds to beat Aaron Targaryen with his shield, yelling at him to yield every time he hits him. And then Aaron goes to pull the dagger on him, and he's just like, no, smacks his hand with the shield, and then proceeds to beat him with his shield. Admits to yielding, and then when he helps him up because, I've won this combat, helps him up and goes to get betrayed again by Aaron and knocks him down again, and then drags him by his foot in front of the King of Ashford. To be like, he has something to say. I'm dragging him over here by his foot, but he has something to tell you, and it's that I won. Please let him know.
I mean, he completely shamed him.
It's so funny when you hear about, these guys have been training their princes and lords, and we fight. We are the best fighters ever. Well, I'm 7 foot tall, and you can't teach that in a fight.
Right. All right, so let's move to some foreshadowing and imagery that's used in the story. I think there's a lot of really interesting images and events and symbols that foreshadow events to come. Just a real quick one. This story takes place at Ashford, and at Ashford Meadow, and that's actually lies just across the river in the Reach from Ashford, which is where Robert Baratheon loses his only battle of his rebellion. So that's just a quick little one. Some of the real imagery and foreshadowing that we want to talk about is what we mentioned earlier. Is it Daron? Daron the drunk?
Yeah, Daron the drunk.
So
that's my middle name, and I am drunk as well. So.
All right. So early in the story, we know that Dunk goes to an inn, and as he enters, a drunk man wakes up and looks at him and says, "I dreamed of you and a dead dragon."
Does he mention the dead dragon when he first sees him, or does he says, "I dream of you, stay away from me"?
When he first sees him, he says, "Stay away from me."
I don't think the dragon imagery is brought in until right before the trial.
Yeah.
Because I feel like he walks. Yeah, I feel like when he's walking with Dunk, the night before the trial, after he's come to say, "Oh, I'll lay in the dirt. I'm the best at laying in the mud." He mentions to him, "I had a dream of you, and it was you standing up underneath the dead dragon."
Yeah. That's when he finally Yeah, because he's like completely trashed when he first meets him. He's just like, "I dreamed you, stay away from me." And
Okay,
then
all
the
right.
second time, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, anyways, he dreams of him and a dead dragon, and obviously that in the story turns out to be Baelor Breakspear, who dies in Dunk's arm. But I think it's also interesting in the context of Dunk's life that we don't know what happens at Summerhall, but there is a tragic event at Summerhall, and not saying that Daron specifically had that dream, but it's interesting that happens at the end of Dunk's life and Egg's life, that Dunk is there when dragons die.
I'm not completely convinced Dunk died at Summerhall, but I'm not going to go into it.
Okay.
No, we'll wait till like we hit episode 3 of this, and then
Sure.
maybe
Sure.
have a little conversation. There's just a quote Bloodraven says in it, and it
Anything Bloodraven says, Brett attributes to gospel.
yeah. I mean, I guess I can go ahead and say it. So Bloodraven in the third book tells Dunk, you can go anywhere. You can go to Winterfell. You can go to Summerhall, or you can go to Ashai by the sea or something. And we know at the end of that book he's heading to Winterfell, and then we know supposedly the end of their life is Summerhall, but then he says Ashai. So I don't know. It's one of those things that Bloodraven says, and it just seems like maybe I'm not saying he's alive now, but maybe he didn't die at Summerhall.
Yeah,
but
that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's that's all I got on that.
Well, yeah, and there's obviously the theory that Dunk is the one that potentially saved
Rhaegar,
Rhaella.
Oh, okay.
Who then gives birth to Rhaegar, either outside, I think outside as the palace is burning.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that Dunk then runs back in and dies, or that he made it out. He may have just helped them out. But yeah. That's it's a possibility, and anything can happen in George's world.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, like I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just saying I caught that, and I saw that they are going to Winterfell after that. That's where they were wanting to go, and then Summerhall is, where supposedly, and then he said Ashai, and of course at the end of the third book it said their adventures are going to take them across the Narrow Sea. So
right.
So who knows? Like, who knows when they do that?
Right. Okay, so let's talk about Dunk's sigil, Dunk's shield. So he obviously, like we said earlier, he takes on Sir Arlen's possessions, but he's not able to use Sir Arlen's sigil. And so he has to have the shield redone. And that's where not the first encounter of Tanzel, but after he encounters her, he asks her to paint the image for him. And he chooses a shooting star above an elm tree on a field of sunset. And obviously, we know that he finds shelter beneath an elm tree. That's where the tree image comes from. Sir Arlen loved the color of the setting sun. That's where the field of sunset comes from. And Dunk sees a shooting star in the sky. So let's talk about it in the context of Brienne. And George has confirmed that Brienne is an ancestor of Sir Duncan. And she actually, her father's title is the Even Star. Even Star means the evening star, the brightest object in the sky next to the moon. And they rule from Evenfall Hall. Evenfall means dusk. And obviously their castle, many people might not know that, but their castle is on the western side of Tarth, which faces the setting sun. Now, in A Feast for Crows, Brienne thinks about seeing a shield with a sigil like that of Dunk's in her father's armory. and she has a new shield painted like that as she travels incognito in search of Sansa and Arya. And of course, Dunk and Brienne also share the same hair collar, but that's obviously because they're related, and we know how George likes hair collar to follow the seed is strong, obviously. But let's talk a little bit about the sigil and potentially what it could mean, specifically when it comes to the shooting star.
The first imagery that comes to my mind is in A Song of Fire and Ice, the red comet.
Right, the red comet.
It's in this instance, it kind of can be you don't want to say the beginning of the end, because it's kind of like, to me, I want to say the beginning of the end, because it's like the end of the Targaryens, but kind of like the beginning of the steps that are going to bring the dragons back. When you look later on, the red comet coming is the Daenerys finding the way to bring the dragons back to life so that they're no longer gone. But he attributes it just to dumb luck. He had to be the only one that saw the shooting star, so it's good luck for him, because all the other noble lords and ladies are in their pavilions, not looking at the night sky, which is what he's getting to see because he's under the elm tree. That's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about the sigil. Also, I think it's funny, with a tree, he's tall, trees are tall. Kind of like in his head, to me, that might be some of the simplistic things he has. I know he mentioned the tree being brown. Looks like it's dead, but I want to say it's Steely Pete that points out that the leaves are green. It's either Steely Pete or Egg that points out the branches are still green, which means living.
Yes.
Right.
So kind of from death, new life can come, which with Breakspear dying in the tournament, it gives us
Sir Arlen as well.
Sir Arlen, whole new branches of what could happen are being born with the dying of, a tree dies, but as it branches, it continues to grow, just differently than originally intended.
I really like that, and to me, that it was kind of, I kind of saw the elm tree as Dunk, and so if he does survive like the tragedy at Summerhall, he's talking about how everything's dying around him, but the tree is still alive, and that was another thing I was thinking about. It definitely still goes with the story, even if he does die at Summerhall, like even with this story or whatever.
And and his, if the tree is still alive, and trees have many branches, Brienne and Hodor and others in Westeros are branches of his, of his life, of him continuing on. Mm-hmm. But I think it's interesting that, we've talked about Dunk having a simplistic view of the world, and he sees the shooting star. He doesn't dwell on it. We compare it to the Red Comet. The Red Comet is dwelled upon in A Song of Ice and Fire. Every character thinks it harkens to their ascension or means a certain thing. So again, I think that's a sign that, Dunk just kind of at this point sees the world for what it is. It's a shooting star. It's good luck. I'm going to take it. I'm going to use it. And
another thing about the sigil, the setting sun. The close of the Targaryen reign, the beginning of the end of the long night that is coming.
Right.
Yep.
That's good. Yep, that's really good. All right, so let's go back to knighthood and this question that George asks in all of his stories, but especially here. What does it mean to be a knight? While Dunk is imprisoned, he remembers a quote from Sir Arlen, and I'm going to read that quote, and then we're going to talk about Dunk's view on knighthood, Sir Arlen's view on knighthood, Westerosi view, all of that. So Sir Arlen says, "A hedge knight is the truest kind of knight." Dunk, the old man, had told him a long, long time ago. Other knights serve the lords who keep them, or from whom they hold their lands. But we serve where we will, for men whose causes we believe in. Every knight swears to protect the weak and innocent, but we keep the vow best, I think. Is knighthood what Sir Arlen is saying there? Or is it, a lord or a lady, a king or a queen, literally raising a sword and placing it on your shoulders after you've said a vow? Is it serving a person? competing in melees, riding in jousts, marching forth for war, fighting in battles? Or is it something more sacred, more intrinsic, more real? Is there a definition that at the end of the day, we could all agree this is what a knight is?
So, well, I think, okay, so there is a definition for what a knight is, but I think that's just like most people fall short of that. And I'm glad you brought that quote up because, I mean, yeah, that's what Sir Arlen is saying is that's what a knight is. You serve and you do I like his point of view with that is he's a hedge knight, so he can go to whoever he believes what a just cause is and serve that lord, and it's just kind of like that sense of morality with them. But at the end of the day, I think knighthood's just a title. I guess it's not really everything it's cracked up to be.
But before you jump in, Ben, I just want to say one thing. Like we said earlier in the podcast, there's a sense of realism and pragmatism that has to come into it because we're talking about human beings, right? And you may want to serve, like you might want to go north and serve Ned Stark, but you're going to need shelter at some point. You're going to need a meal at some point. You're going to need to make enough coin to continue the journey. So at some point, you're going to serve people that might not be honorable or just, right?
Yes. Yep. A flexible morality, kind of like Sam. His morality is so flexible when he needs it to be, because like he lies and cheats and gets John the Lord Commander position. I don't know what that has to do with knighthood, but
yeah,
I guess it kind of.
I think the last line of that quote to me is the meaning of the knight, swearing to protect the weak and innocent. I feel like to me, when you break down what being a knight is, that is what it is to defend the world from the wrongs committed just because they can be committed, which we see with him protecting Tanzel from Aryan. Regardless of your status, he stood for what was right in that situation. And to me, I think that line is my definition of knighthood in this series.
I think Jamie is the one who describes knighthood the best, like the realistic version, not like what it means to you, but like they make you swear this vow to this thing, and then you have to swear like 100 different vows, and they're all contradicting each other. But yeah, if you want to take like the best, what knighthood is like in the best form, it's what Sir Arlen thinks, and I mean that's what I would think of as a knight, and what I thought of as a knight growing up, and stuff. So yeah, I mean,
Sir Brett.
It's your grace.
To compare it to other characters in pop culture, knights are in a way superheroes, right? Superheroes of Westeros. They have the people think they have these skills, these trainings, these abilities. They believe in right and wrong. They're going to come riding in. That's why George uses that image, that very first initial imagery of Jamie so well. He comes riding in on a white horse in gold. He's beautiful. He's got these golden locks, the white cloak. He's what a knight should look like. He's what a superhero, these people would view like we view a superhero. And then George completely just destroys any notion of what this definition means through his work.
Yeah, because as we see with Jamie, he betrays his king. Betrays his king by killing him, continues to betray his king by sleeping with the queen / his sister, throwing kids from towers. All these things that knights are not supposed to do, he does, yet is continued to be seen as, like you said, the poster boy for what a knight should look like.
Right.
What isn't okay? if you break it down, isn't Jamie and Cersei, aren't they technically third cousins as well?
No, they're twins.
No, I understand that,
Oh,
but Tywin married his cousin.
Yeah, Tywin married his cousin.
So
well,
aren't
I
they
mean,
technically
well,
so
in the state of Georgia, as long as it's not your first cousin, it's legal. They legit question they ask you when you get a marriage license.
Yeah,
Oh, wow. I didn't
it's
wow.
it's actually like that in most states that as long as it's not the first cousin, you're okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
Moving on.
Moving on. Let's talk about a more general question here, because I think this ties into this question of what is a knight. The Westerosi would ask themselves that, right?
Mhm.
Because people in Westeros are, so defined by their station in life and their titles or lack thereof that it begins to shape their moral code. I think in our world, in the real world, we talk about what does it mean to be a good person. You can have subcategories of that question. What does it mean to be a good father? What does it mean to be a good husband, a good sister, a good cousin, whatever? And it's just interesting that this is something that George is exploring that's intrinsically important to his story, because he's dealing with nobility and knights and everything. But isn't he really just asking, what does it mean to be a good person with all of these characters?
Yeah, yeah. I think most of the stories in any part of the series, well, except for maybe like the Princess and the Queen or whatever, but it's like it's always about people struggling with their identity and
Right.
and dealing with all their flaws and struggling with their moralities and
their hearts in conflict, as George uses the quote from Faulkner. That's what's worth writing about, people's hearts in conflict with themselves.
Yes, and I think that's why we've released about 15 hours of content. If you gather up our episodes in a span of like a month or 2 months, pretty much. And we wouldn't do this if there wasn't something interesting to talk about, and that's
right.
There's going back to kind of what we've talked about through the whole podcast today. George writes characters so two-sided, where like you love Stannis Baratheon, but there's so many qualities about Stannis that are not honorable at all.
Right.
But he's written a character that you can point out reasons why he is your favorite character. And it's the same with like a Jaime Lannister, as you just discussed. Great physical look, and then he tears Jaime down, and then the whole series kind of becomes Jaime losing his hand, losing his ability to wield a sword, losing his prowess, and now struggling to find himself in a world where he can no longer bully his way to get what he wants.
Right.
Because he can't just cut down anyone who's going to question his thoughts and minds. He's really got to, well, what do I need to do to make sure what I need done happens?
Right. George takes away most of the characters' like value, right? Jaime's value is his hand, not that he looks at his hand and says, this is what is worth me, but that's his skill, that's his weapon, that's how he, like you said, Ben, how he makes it through the world, both in battle but also in bullying himself, like you said. George takes those away from every character, and makes them redefine who they are, what their purpose is. I think it's just amazing. I want to read this exchange. This isn't a quote, but this is basically what happens here, and I want to talk about it in the context back to what does a knight mean? What is a good person? All of that. My personal favorite exchange in The Hedge Knight is the one between Baelor and Dunk. And it's the moment where Baelor has dismissed Egg. He tells him to go away, and he asks Dunk, how good a knight are you? How skilled are you? He's actually troubled by Dunk's answer, because Maekar, Egg's father, has returned to Ashford and is focusing his anger and rage on Dunk for what he did to Aerion.
I was going to say also, the anger is also put on because Daeron the drunk sees a chance to to throw Dunk under the bus as well
That's
as a
yeah,
scapegoat.
that's what I was just going to say that
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. Magar has been misled by Arion and Daron as well, and he would never believe Egg because he says Egg's lied numerous times in the past.
I think he actually used the line. Aegon is known to tell a lie himself, as you surely know.
Yeah. A fact that Dunk knows all too well. So here Baelor asks Dunk, "How good a knight are you?" Now that question is asked in the context of what's your skill set? How can you fight? But again, back to this question of what is a knight? What is a good person? Baelor should know the answer, right?
Yeah.
Dunk stood up for the weak and innocent. Now, he did so by harming nobility, and not just any nobility, but one of royal blood. So his question is about skill, not virtue. And even a good, just man like Baelor Breakspear, in a way, is unable to push back against this system, this social order that knights are required to keep up.
They're only as good as their skill. It doesn't matter what their virtues are. And going back to why Jaime is viewed as such a good knight throughout A Song of Fire and Ice, nobody can beat him. So how can you say he's not a knight when no one can beat him?
Right.
Because I think even Ned mentions compliments his prowess, but hates his moral compass.
Right. Yeah, even Stannis makes sure when he sends the letter attacking Cersei and Jaime for bearing bastards born of incest, he says, "Make it Sir Jaime Lannister," for whatever else the man is a knight.
Wow.
Right, yeah.
I never caught that.
Stannis dots the I's and crosses the T's. He's not going to let a letter go out that has mistakes in it.
I know that whole sequence of the guy writing the letter and Stannis, he keeps call it what it is. The
guy's like, I'm about to write a note of treason, and you want me to make sure I address him as Sir Jaime. You are having sex with your sister.
Yeah,
these children do not deserve the throne.
It comes across really well the TV show too.
Absolutely.
The facial expressions sell it so well, and TV show he's just like,
he's like, my beloved brother, and Stannis shoots a look like, he was my beloved brother. I didn't love him. He didn't love me. Take it out.
Yeah, people don't love me. I don't care.
Yeah,
it's my throne by right. My blood should be on the throne.
But yeah, it's Jaime Lannister, and he's like, Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. Call him what he is. And then he goes back and edits it again and says, "Well,
Sir Jaime Lannister, the
Kingslayer." Oh man, but we're talking about Baelor and Dunk's exchange here, but then it kind of seems that Baelor comes around, right? Mm-hmm. Because at the end, he comes to Dunk's rescue. He rides out, unbeknownst to his family. His family actually thinks it's Prince Valar, right?
Yes, because he's wearing his son's armor.
Right. And he joins the trial by 7. And Baelor says, "This man protected the weak as every true knight must. Let the gods determine if he was right or wrong." Now, obviously, he's still leaving it up to the gods there. But it seems to me he recognizes that Dunk is a true knight. He is a true knight. He is a good person. But again, the system is still set up where it's hard. And I guess you could, in a sense, even though our system is much fairer than systems of the past, there's still things that hold people back in our own society. Let's talk a little bit about that, of this conflict between their social order and what it actually means to be a good person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason that system is not around today, But
it's quite simple why that system's not around today. Because there were more people that were not skilled that were able to finally say, "Hey, let's make it so skilled people don't have any control over the system." And again, the majority, because that's one thing with nobility, majority will always beat minority. And the nobility, even at the top of the food chain, were always the minority in their system. kings can't rule kingdoms if subjects don't follow along. So as soon as a king isn't providing for his subjects, they want a new king that will provide. And if they determine that they can provide for themselves better than a king can, there will no longer be a king.
I think you just like broke that down pretty wonderfully. I mean,
Yep.
I was like, that talking about that subject gets really close to a really iffy subject in our world today. So it's very tread lightly on that one.
It is. It's kind of funny though. A lot of people who are into this series. I'm not gonna say everyone agrees politically, but everyone kind of most people probably wouldn't have like some terrible political like arguments. But I mean,
I know some very rational people that if the word politics comes up, lose their ever loving mind. So I just don't. I just don't.
Right.
Politics and religion. I stay away from those subjects.
Yep.
But it is weird because A Song of Ice and Fire is very political. But it isn't. George has come out and said it's not. It has nothing to do with politics now. But
of course it doesn't, because he wrote it 20-something years ago.
But
politics now.
Yeah, no, but what he meant is like it was more of an attack on feudalism.
Right.
But there are things you can take from that and apply to politics.
Absolutely.
Now. Yeah.
Because humans, while humans advance, they progress. Our technology, our ideas, our beliefs, we're still intrinsically the same animals that we've always been. And so no matter what society we have, we still tend to display some of the worst habits, no matter whether it's a king or whatever a system we have.
I think a great example of this is in the main series, Robert's belief. Even though he has now become king, he does not have the physique he once had, but he is still under the belief that he can step up and take on anyone to a fault. Right. Literally, the reason he dies is I don't care how drunk I am, I'm still can kill that boar.
Right.
And then smiling about it on his deathbed. I did it. Make sure you roast that boar because I did it. I may be dead, but I got him. So it's one of those things where for as much as the Baratheon rule was relished in the kingdom for its time period, the king himself was still very much in the mindset that the Targaryens have. He had kind of become the thing that he had sought to overthrow.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Star Wars quote. You become the very thing you sought to destroy.
Yeah. I mean, Robert didn't even, not to get too far down this rabbit hole, but like, there's another podcast that just analyzed Robert Baratheon, and they struggled to even come up with what was the accomplishment of his administration. Like, Robert
absolutely nothing.
He defeated the Greyjoys, but that's not really an accomplishment. That's that's a rebellion that he put down.
And it seems like the Greyjoys always get put down because they just lack resources. They can't really. Yeah. They can't really keep because.
I don't see how they're the ones that always get put down though, because they're literally the only group we ever hear about that has a naval force. Like, can't they just blockade the world and win everything by starvation means?
Well, they have you would think, but they have the red wines, and they're technically
you get around it. Rabbit hole. We're gonna get on a real deep rabbit hole. Yeah. That's another podcast entirely. The naval strength of Westeros.
We should. I would love to do that because
that would be actually fun.
I want a recreation of Stannis just ripping apart the Iron Fleet off Fair Isle.
Oh yeah.
I mean, he literally drives his ships right through their ships. I just fucking love that image.
I can just imagine the image of them breaking in they say Robert leads with his warhammer. I just imagine that the wall literally fell because Robert hit it with his warhammer.
Yeah.
There were no catapults. It was just Robert knocking down buildings. It was Red Faction guerrilla everywhere with a warhammer.
Yeah.
That would be like a cool little like short mini series.
I'm also still waiting for the Game of Thrones RTS. I need Civilization Game of Thrones edition.
Oh yeah, that would be really cool.
Where were we?
This is where Brett's hangover your drinking and my sinus infection, like all just like, now let's just talk about who we love and who killed who and who can kill the other person. And they're like, what? Our listeners are like, what?
No, I did walk into a Barnes and Noble a few weeks ago, and they have a Risk version of like it's like Westeros, but it's Risk.
I have that.
Oh, what? Okay.
Yeah. There's actually two boards. You can
Yes,
it's Westeros and Essos, and you can play. I don't know. There's like 10 different houses, and then I think there's the 8 main noble houses, and then you get to play the Targaryens, and they have to start off like in the east, obviously, and then the slavers, but I think they call them like Old Gis or something like that.
Yeah.
I've never
sponsored by Hasbro.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never actually had a chance to play it like with a big group of people, but just like a couple folks, it's been kind of fun. We each pick a house and just play the Westeros map.
Now, if we do that, if we go to that con, definitely bring that. Yeah, that'd be fun.
I also did a not Patreon, Kickstarter. There's a Game of Thrones miniature that these guys just created, and it's actually just going to, like, everyone who backed the campaign got all their stuff, but it's actually going out for production, larger production, and sell. I have no idea what it does. I just was like, I'll contribute to this. And when the box came, my wife was like, what the hell is this thing now? All right. So anyways, back to, I'm not even sure where we were.
I've been kind of scrolling down as we've talked.
Oh yeah. We're still talking about what does it mean to be a good knight and good person.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've covered.
Yeah.
I think we've covered most of that. That, you know, there is a definition. If you look at our own world's history, the chivalric code, there is a definition of what a knight is. There is a definition in the text. There is a definition of what a true knight is, what a hedged knight is. All these different things.
It's kind of like there's a what's a Webster's definition, but then you have your social definition of what
there
that
you go.
means.
I like it.
You got your Webster and your Urban Dictionary definition.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about some of the minor characters in the story. Some of our favorites, some of our least favorites, or some of the worst.
Yes.
Steely Pete for life.
Steely Pete. All right, let's talk about Steely Pete first. I mean, you guys have already talked about
Yeah, like that. We touched on briefly, but I just love the no nonsense manner that he has. He's really not caught up in either side of this. He's just, I'm here to make armor and make money. But he does come to help, basically, I guess, kind of help Dunk towards the end there, make sure all his armor is up to snuff, because he stood up for the little guy, and Steely Pete, I'm pretty sure, sees himself as the little guy around this nobility. So he, to me, one of the description of him, it's what won me over, as Brett said, this little short jack dude just making armor, walking around without his shirt on, not a care in the world, I make helms that look like helms.
Yeah. And then the visor thing, and Dunk like specifically thinks of that during the fight, and like lifts Arian's visor in the fight
and beats him with a shield.
Yeah, and it's Steely Pate, you guys. Pate, like a pate is a head, and like the
or pate like the clay we have all over the place here.
Oh yeah, I don't.
Whatever.
I just didn't want like people that comment on this and be like,
they're already commenting on the fact that at least 2 of the 3 of us are speaking with a very significant Southern drawl. I mean,
oh, actually, yeah. I've actually had a compliment on that.
Oh, okay, that's first.
Oh, really?
But that was my favorite minor character throughout this first book, at least. He was the one that he stood out, even though the Fossaways had a much larger part in the story. He's the one that stood out to me.
I do really like Raymond Fossaway though.
Raymond, yeah.
I feel like eventually maybe like eventually I want him to like meet him again, because I feel like it would be a cool like group. Like you get like Glendon Ball, you get Raymond Fossaway, and then you get Kyle the Cat all together, and maybe Sir Maynard Plum comes back into the fold, because he's, obviously, but I did that with air quotes. But
I'm glad I'm not the only one doing that tonight. I'm not going to lie.
yeah.
But I forget that you guys can see me, but nobody's going to see me when they're listening to this.
Right,
yes.
right.
But I thought it'd be kind of like a cool, like, he talked about, in the third one, he said that the Fellowship of the Hedge didn't last or whatever. And it'd just be cool if, like, there's a story where they're all together again.
Another favorite minor character of mine is Lionel Baratheon.
Yes.
It's funny, we talked about this on one of our last episodes, Brett. Like, there just seem to be, all the Baratheons at some point seem to be a carbon copy of Robert. Like, they're big, they're not fat, but they're big, they're bearded, they're laughing, they're drinking, they're fucking, they're fighting. And Lionel obviously is nicknamed the Laughing Storm.
To quote you earlier, the seed is strong.
The seed is strong. Absolutely. Yes.
I love the fact that Lionel, and this is kind of also going back to Steely Pate, talks about how Lionel would knock the ornaments off anyone that jousted. They would knock him off his head.
Yes.
And the common folk love Lionel because of it, because they're taking these gems and these golds and be like, I'm eating for a long time on this. Suddenly, anyone who had an ornate helm is like, not going to mess with him. I don't want this messed up.
I don't think this character needs to be said, but Baelor Breakspear, he's just seems to be a good guy. And like we said earlier, his death potentially leads to the saving of the realm. Fought for Duncan. Duncan becomes Lord Commander later on. Potentially he's the one that saved Rhaella at Summerhall, thus allowing Rhaegar to be born, and so on and so forth.
A little fuzzy on this because I'm just kind of losing train of thought on this one. Baelor, the one that Sir Arlen jousted against?
Yes.
Yes, he remembers that. He's the one
yes.
He's the one that
lances. Yeah, 4 lances, not the 7 that Duncan has heard. Right. Just making sure I had that right, because it's getting a little fuzzy there on that one.
Which I really like Baelor. He kind of reminds me of sort of like Ned-ish, but I want to say more like Aemon. Like, he's got Ned's qualities, where the sense of justice and all that, but he's kind of more realistic and knowledgeable. Well, not realistic, but more knowledgeable in the way that
he can see both sides of the argument, which is not a quality that is seen throughout this series very often. Everybody sees it from their side, and that's it. Whereas Baelor is seeing it from either side. Even the comment made where he's like, "Oh, it was 7 spears," and Duncan spoke out of turn to the nobility, which some of the Targaryens would have said, "Treason, kill him now." Baelor was like, "It was 4, but I can see where you're getting 7 because tales grow as they are told." Right. So understanding.
Yeah, and I feel like Egg is kind of going to become a lot like Baelor, but a lot of people think that Baelor would have been better because he wasn't pushing so hard for the common folk to have more rights. So
Baelor would have been better because if somebody backtalked Baelor, he would beat his ass with his knighthood and skill, whereas Egg is never shown or talked about having any sort of sword skill or physical prowess.
Well, I think that's...
Of course, he does have a 7-foot-tall commander of the Kingsguard, so I guess he doesn't have to.
Well, I think that's because George wants to not talk about that so he can write more stories, because apparently there's supposed to be like 9 novellas or something.
It's never going to happen, but we'll dream.
I'd say we'll at least get... Well, I hate to say it like this. We're going to get the one where he goes to Winterfell. I mean, I think that's going to be important for some reason, and George will get that one done. But
I think we'll get him. I think we'll get him. He just he has to get over the huge hurdle of TWOW and then the ending of the series. I think if he ever finishes the series, I think he'll have no problem writing
Yeah.
these mini stories, because he doesn't have problems writing those.
But Arian is definitely, I think we can all agree on this one, the worst character that is presented.
Yes.
Well, I'm torn on calling him the worst because he comes off, he's just overly spoiled princeling.
Yeah.
To me, but like can you call somebody bad when they've never been taught differently?
Oh, totally. But yeah, he's spoiled. Like, yeah, I don't know. He thinks he's a dragon.
He's
it's unfortunate.
He's the Joffrey of this story, right?
Except
I can see some redeeming qualities in Arian.
He can actually fight.
Joffrey, no, not at all.
Yeah,
that's a good way to put it. Arian would talk smack, but you knew he could back it up.
Right.
Whereas Joffrey can talk smack, and I'm pretty sure in a fight between Joffrey and Arya, I'm going to take Arya. And this is before she learns how to be a faceless person and all that stuff. I would take straight up Arya over Joffrey any day of the week. Because going in the series, she already beats him with a pick and he had a sword.
It's like Joffrey and Viserys, if they fought each other. Like, we wouldn't know who would win because neither of them have any skill at all.
The only person that wins in that is if they both die, then we win. God, I forgot how awful another story, another day. I forgot how awful Viserys was as a person.
So, let's stay on Arian for just a minute. So, Arian's nickname is Arian Brightflame, also known as Arian the Monstrous. He's described as that deadly combination of cruel and arrogant. And we know much later on in life, he's in this story, he believes he is a dragon, but he comes to really believe that. So after the events of the Hedge Knight, he's exiled to Lys. And
do they say he is exiled in the book, or is he just told he needs to go to the free cities for the time being? I don't know if they use the term exiled as
Dunk I think Dunk does, but then Makar said he just sent him to Lys. But pretty much he's not like exiled permanently. It's just Makar is like, you're going to boarding school pretty much.
Right. Because he returns and fights in the third Blackfire Rebellion. But there is some theories out there that did he create a bright flame line while he was in Essos? Some people believe that Illyrio or Varys or Illyrio's wife, I think it's Sarah, Serra, could all either be from the Blackfire line or potentially one or more of them from the Bright Flame line. So I think that's kind of interesting. It's never really said what happens while he's in Essos.
And we know that Viserys' son, or it might have been a daughter. I think it's a son though, because that's why it was a problem. Was set aside because they didn't want, because Arian drank the freaking wildfire. He was like actually in the line of succession and was going to be the next king, and then he drank the wildfire. And I think probably in celebration of that, and died. Like basically, they had a what is it, like a council meeting, and they set
a great council.
Yeah, and they set Arian's child aside and elected Dunk as the new king. And then so no one, Egg? Egg, yeah. And but yeah, no one knows what happened to that, and probably for good reason. George is, probably playing around with that idea.
Yep. And that person could return to Essos potentially, and create a line that then produces either Varys or Illyrio or Sarah or whomever in Essos.
I do like the idea that Varys is somehow a Blackfire or Bright Flame, because Viserys. It's a very Targaryen name.
But yeah, Varys is a very you're right. It's a very
or sounding
Valyrian and Targaryen name. Yeah.
And never know what color his hair is because he keeps his head shaved.
Yeah.
Right.
Much like Egg did to hide his identity.
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
yeah, so it just makes a lot of sense.
Another character that I actually found that I really did not like, and I don't remember disliking him so much when I first read the book, was Sir Manfred Dondarrion.
Oh yeah, God.
I mean, he's so arrogant and dismissive of Dunk. I mean, it's possible he might not remember Sir Arlen. We have to be fair there. But he just has absolutely no regard for Dunk, or doesn't even try to help him out, or doesn't even say, oh, well, yeah, maybe I remember him. But the contrast to Beric Dondarrion, that's what really stood out to me, because I really like Beric Dondarrion in the main series, and this guy just came off as a complete and total asshole.
Oh, yeah.
This going back to what I said a moment ago about Arian, can you really call somebody bad when they've never been taught anything different?
Yeah.
Manfred had fought a war, which means he had to have some rhyme or reason, right or wrong, to do it. And then to just completely dismiss, like you said, completely dismiss Dunk, and a man took a wound in his service, and he didn't even think to care that somebody was injured in his service. Like you said, just to completely dismiss that, to me, I think, shows he just no regard for human life, no regard for people that aren't of his noble stature.
Right. Yeah, so, he has no empathy at all. Like, he just
doesn't care. And that's why I say, like, I feel like when you look at the scale of bad, I feel like he falls further on it than Arian, because how can you be bad if you've never been taught good? Okay. And Manfred obviously has been taught good at some point and just doesn't care.
Sir Stefan Fossaway.
Okay. I know he's meant to be like a dick, but he's hilarious to me. He's just like,
he's Braun. He's Braun.
Yes, except he fell on the other side, the other team this time.
Well, no, I mean, Braun would fall on the other team if given the chance for a lordship, and that's exactly what happened here. He was completely for standing behind Duncan until Arian was like, "You want some land, bro?" He's like, "Yes, bro, I want some land." And then joins the other side. And I mean, can you really blame a guy when your possible soon-to-be king gives you this golden opportunity? You got to take it, because he has no loyalty to Duncan whatsoever.
Yeah,
it's
like
don't like the dude, but when you sit back and look at why he did it, you got to be like, I completely understand why you did it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I can see that. And then you get Raymond Fossaway. He's kind of like Dunk. He's younger. He's got that sense of what a knight should be, and then that's why he fights with Dunk.
I do really love the symbolism there, though, of Sir Stefan telling Raymond he's not quite ripe,
and then he goes,
and then Raymond taking the green apple as his sigil. I was like, dude, it's perfect symbolism. And of course, later on down the line, when you have the two lines of House Fossaway in A Song of Fire and Ice, now seeing where the split occurred, because this is literally the split of the Fossaway tree we see right before our eyes,
which is cool.
And I like that sorry.
Oh no, I just said that. That's cool.
As they battle in the melee, they're basically even, and so they just stop. They're not able to one up the other one. So at least Sir Raymond wasn't killed or injured by Sir Stefan.
I mean, I don't think he would have. I don't think he tried to kill him, because if you see earlier,
Well, I know. I'm just saying. I just like that the better character, if you will. The good one.
Neither side was able to one up the other, which the way Sir Stefan carried himself, he assumed he was Raymond's superior. And Raymond has now shown he is more of an equal than a superior.
Right. Exactly.
Speaking of the trial and talking about characters, and also going back to your definition of knighthood, we have Baylor's strategy that he's going to be the one to take on the King's Guard, because they cannot. And is it?
It's Stefan or Lionel. Lionel's like, is that chivalry?
Is that chivalrous? And Breakspear, for as great as we've made him as a character, goes, it'll help. It's basically like, it'll help us win.
And he goes, that we'll leave that up to the gods. And
exactly.
Seems like
is it Robin Hunt?
Riesling, I think. Riesling.
Something.
He's got the one eye.
The broken leg. From
that's Beesbury, Humphrey Beesbury.
From I don't know where I got Robin Hunt from. That's
because there's Robin Riesling or Riesling, I think that's his name, fighting on the side of Dunk too.
Yes, but you have him with a broken leg mentioning, as long as they don't fall off my horse, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Because he dies.
Oh.
Yeah, I could not imagine trying to fight with a broken leg. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the other Humphrey dies too.
Yes,
And
but so
brother-in-laws.
basically the only people that stood for Dunk's cause that live are Dunk, Lionel, and Raymond.
Yep. And Lionel didn't even fight for Dunk's cause. He was just like, I wanted to tweak Makar's nose and fight. He wanted to be remembered.
I wasn't going to miss out on the chance or something that hasn't happened in 100 years.
Yeah.
It's such a Robert reason to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Glory.
Yeah, he was fighting for
heroism. That's all that was. He had no care who was right or wrong in it.
Right.
But yeah.
I mean, Raymond lived though.
I would say Raymond, Lionel, and Dunk.
Oh yeah.
That's it.
Yep. Well, and Riesling. Riesling lived. The one-eyed guy. He was the one that got his helmet knocked off, and he had one eye, and he had already lost an eye from jousting without a helmet, and he was still jousting, and he actually lived through that somehow.
Okay. So Humphrey was the one that took the wound to the groin and died.
Yes. And then the other Humphrey died from injuries afterwards. He didn't die instantly.
Yeah.
But then, the Robin Riesling guy, Riesling, I don't know. He lives, though.
Okay. But yeah, so going back to your bittersweet point, we won, but did we really win? There's so much that has been lost at the end of this combat that do you really want to chalk that one up as a win?
I agree, and he definitely doesn't take that lightly, so which is nice. Like, but it just sucks that Dunk does. He constantly feels guilty about it, and it's like, dude, like you're fine. Like, you deserve that. Like, you deserve the win. You shouldn't feel guilty.
Survivor guilt is a real thing, and that's something that Duncan has to cope with for the rest of these series we see.
No, I agree. It just sucks that he feels that way. Travis, do you have anything?
I was looking at the list of the participants in the melee. I think you got them all.
Is it Robin Riesling?
Robin, yeah. So Dunk's allies are Robin Riesling, Sir Humphrey Harding, Lord Lionel Baratheon, Sir Humphrey Beesbury, the newly knighted Raymond Fossaway, and Prince Baelor Targaryen, who face off against Aerion Targaryen, Daeron Targaryen, Maekar, 3 knights of the Kingsguard, and Sir Stefan Fossaway. And
by the way, I'm just gonna assume in these prequel books, if you're Beesbury, you're gonna die. Because
they're the Carmine of
because in the the Princess and the Queen, or the Rogue Prince, Kristen Cole slits one of the Beesbury's throats for being on the side of the blacks.
When you say blacks, you mean like Blackfire?
No, the Black Dragons. Because it's the Dance of the Dragons. I don't know if have you read Princess and the Queen and
No, honestly, I'll be honest. This sounds like a book I need to read because I don't think I have. I've read the main series and then
this series. It's really short. I think both books together are about 5 hours instead.
Okay, so if it's along with a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms kind of thing,
it covers the Dance of the Dragons, but
it's more history. Like, it's not a straight up story like Dunk and Egg.
Kind of like the Silmarillion for Tolkien, but
it's like a Maester is writing it, but it's worth a listen for sure.
And the audiobook's cool because Jorah, from the show, he reads it.
I might need to get you to send me the link to that so I can get that downloaded.
Yes, I can. Yeah, I'll definitely do it. It's worth a read, and it's interesting. There's so many great characters in that.
I think we've hit all the high points, but I know this is something, like, as we've talked, that has hit me that we really haven't spoken about. Going back to very early in the book, the wealth that Sir Arlen had was basically tied up in his armor and the horses, which I think shows that his knighthood is expensive, which goes forward with Dunk saying, I need to win at least one so that I can get somebody else's horse and armor.
Right.
so that when I lose, I don't lose everything. But also showing that I think Sir Arlen's advice to him was to never name a horse because you never know when it's going to die. But he has a horse named Sweetfoot and Thunder, so he's named his animals, doesn't follow his own advice.
Right.
Therefore breaking codes that he laid out for Duncan that he wasn't able to follow himself. And then, like you said, we said earlier, Brett, about Sweetfoot sells him, never comes back for him. Uses that money for Steely Pete, and then eventually basically turns it into Makar when he sends eggs back. I think sends egg with a horse.
No. He rides. They have
a donkey. He gets.
Well, in the first one, they had he had three horses. He had Sweetfoot, he had
Chestnut, and Thunder.
And then Chestnut dies between the books, and then they visit Aemon at the Citadel, and he gives him Maester, the donkey.
That's what it is. Okay. I want to make sure I followed that along correctly. Yeah. But yeah, that was just one of those things where, as dumb as it sounds to talk about animals and stuff like that in the series with so many overlying things, but it was a big step for Dunk in my opinion as growing up, because he knew, even though he has attachment to Sweetfoot, he couldn't sell Chestnut because he wouldn't get anything for it. He couldn't sell Thunder because he needed to ride it in the list. So he knew it had to be Sweetfoot.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I can't wait to talk about this next book because Sir Bennis of the Brown Shield.
Dude, like the whole time we've been talking, like everything I want to think about is like next book or the third book, and I'm like,
yeah.
Brett's told me we're going to do podcasts on these. I don't want to give away what I want to say about that now, yes. So I'm trying to reel it back in so it doesn't come out. But yeah, like
it's hard because the second one is my favorite. I think it just has
the Checky Lion.
Yes.
I don't know what his real name is because, like I said, I only had the all three of them put together.
Yes.
And just the Checky Lion is the name that stands out to me so much. Yeah. And then the Gallows Knight, the third book.
Oh yeah.
The Mystery Knight. But yeah. So what else is there to cover in this book?
Yeah, I think we've covered everything.
I think we're just rambling at this point.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure someone's going to listen to this and email you angrily and be like, you forgot this, and this, and this, and this, but, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I was going to ask where you think this book ranks. And obviously I don't want to do that until we get to the third one. Mm-hmm. But what do you, Brett, I'll ask you this first because perhaps I know this answer. Maybe I don't. Do you like this book better than the main series?
I wouldn't say better, but it's just so different, and it's really refreshing. I think it goes well in like contrast. Like so if I read too much of this, which actually I went through this so many times because it's so short. So I've been through it about 6 times in the span of like a month. So it's actually inspired me to want to go back to Game of Thrones to get that feel again. But I don't know. I say that, but I feel like I'm lying to myself, and because I really like Dunk and Egg, so I would say I like it almost better. But I don't think I would like it as much if I didn't have A Song of Ice and Fire there, though.
That's fair.
But I do. Yeah, I think I do like it better, though.
I think it's easier to digest than A Song of Fire and Ice, just because, like you said, it's short and condensed. And for me, I feel like the only reason I would say I like it better than A Song of Fire and Ice is I wouldn't be able to say that if I didn't enjoy A Song of Fire and Ice. I love when authors write pieces that explain more of what's going on in their world. So the statement I made earlier about Sir Barristan the Bold, the reason Sir Barristan, in my mind, when I read the books, is such an important character and so respected, is because after reading these books, you see how respected Sir Duncan the Tall was. So without Sir Duncan having his exploits, him being unseated by Barristan means nothing. So I feel like it gives more credibility to some of the characters in A Song of Fire and Ice. So that's where I kind of stand on it. And I know, like, I stand on that crux because the series Sir Barristan, what you see on the show, is nowhere near as awesome as the book Sir Barristan is.
Yeah.
Like the first scene you're introduced where he is like defending Daenerys and he kills out whatever the bug thing is. Just kills it with a wooden staff, and you think this old dude with a staff is just some random old hobo. Nope, Sir Barristan Selmy.
Yeah.
I forgot that you were like a huge Barristan Selmy fan.
Oh yeah,
so,
dude. Barristan is my Stannis.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and I think we were robbed. Obviously, I would have liked to seen Barristan.
The way they describe Barristan in the books, there's no reason I can't remember the name of the group in the show now.
Sons of the Harpy.
Sons of the Harpy. There's no reason 7 Sons of the Harpy should have been able to kill Sir Barristan and Grey Worm after Grey Worm has been presented as a super fighter through the whole series.
Well, we kind of, not to get in. I guess
that,
I guess we can cut it, but so we were kind of going through, not I
Season
guess
5.
Playing a little bit of a devil's advocate. You know, all these Sons of the Harpy, they're aristocrats. They've grown up with like combat, you know, like basically master at arms per se. They're rich.
I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I don't care how rich you are. Sir Barristan Selmy has made a name for himself.
Yeah,
and is one of the few people that after the Targaryens fell was pardoned and allowed to stay in service to the king.
Oh yeah,
even though he was loyal to the other king.
No, so, I think I think Barristan would have won in that predicament. It's just, you know, it's not unrealistic, but it just didn't seem fitting, and I don't think that's gonna.
Yeah, I don't think it was a fitting in because I mean I think we all probably think Barristan's going to die in the main series, but he gets to defend the city against the slavers. He's training new knights. He's riding out at the end of A Dance with Dragons. So there was going to be a very fitting end for him. And like, it's interesting that you like Barristan, we like Stannis. Season 5.
yeah.
I don't like Stannis' end in season 5, but from a narrative point of view, it's much more satisfying than Barristan's end, right?
Well, I think it was one of the things in season 5, since you said you were cutting this anyway, Brett. Once Stannis burned his daughter, that to me was the end of Stannis as a redeeming.
That's his arc.
Series.
Yeah.
That was
that's the end of his arc as well. I mean, that's going to be, you know, there's some people out there who are Stannis fans that I engage with that they just don't think Stannis will sacrifice Shireen, period. I'm not one of those. I think he has to.
Yeah,
I think he's backed himself into the corner of having to at this point.
Right. Well, but it's not going to be for lifting the weather to march on Winterfell. I mean, he's not going to throw away his heir for that. He would sacrifice his daughter if he thought it could help him defeat the others, though, which is what he believes his mission in life is. As the king is, as Azor Ahai, all that, you know, stuff that Melisandre has fed him. You know, that's tragic and it's terrible, but it makes sense in the context of a character like Stannis.
Right.
But yeah, Barristan went out, unfortunately. I mean, I'm like Brett. Yes, the Unsullied should not have, but you know, the Unsullied is very good at formational fighting. That was in alleys and all of that. It's not right. But I just wish Sir Barristan had survived.
It's like,
I think you could have killed Grey Worm in that scene and had the same emotional impact.
Probably,
instead of killing Sir Barristan.
Yeah.
And
plus, I think
it doesn't make any sense for Daenerys to have the Unsullied being the City Watch. That's not what they're made for. You know, but you know, I mean, obviously she had to do what she had to do. You know.
Yeah, and I was I was looking forward to Tyrion and Barristan interacting. Like that was, you know, I've always wondered, okay, especially in the Dance with Dragons, like Daenerys is not coming back for a while in the Winds of Winter. So what happens if they are able to really defeat this slaver alliance? Like you've got Greyjoy's there, you've got Tyrion, you've got Ser Jorah back, you've got Sir Barristan, you've got the Unsullied, you've got some of the slaves that are going to come over to her side, you've got these new knights. I mean, there's going to be a lot happening inside the walls of Meereen, and a lot of people vying for power in her absence. Plus 2 dragons circling over.
Because the main dragon's just like, I want no part of this. I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go do dragon things.
Yep.
You could do a whole story on just Tyrion.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah. All right. Well.
Yeah.
I think that was a great first foray into the Dunk and Egg novellas. The Hedge Knight, a more innocent time in Westeros' past.
It's like Pepperidge Farms, you know.
Pepperidge Farms remembers. I also like how we managed to talk about a book that is barely 4 hours long for almost half as long as the book is this evening.
That happens to us quite regularly.
Our episodes average about 2.5 to about 2.5 hours. I mean, obviously we cut stuff down, but
yeah.
So we always talk for like 3 hours, 3.5 hours. But
so Ben, it sounds like you're willing to come back and join us when we do the Sworn Sword and the Mystery Knight.
Oh yeah, I'm always down to talk about old Dunk and Egg.
All right,
awesome.
All right, so Brett. Well, first of all, Ben, tell the folks again where they can find you on social media.
They can find me on Twitter at Dr. DoctorFumblez 07. They can find me there.
And plug. We're all about the plugs, you know. I don't think we've had someone on here that actually had like something to plug yet. No, Pat.
Yeah. Well, I said on my Twitter, if you find the DoctorFumblez 07 Twitter, I've got my Twitch link on there as well. I'm just starting kind of to stream different video games, a lot of back and forth with people, much like Brett. Just general, I like to just talk to people, and since most of the time I'm sitting here playing games and talking about stuff like this, I figure I'd let people get involved. So
nice.
That's why I'm doing it. So
it sounds like fun. As soon as you do Gears of War 4, I'll
be there.
Yes.
But and I do believe on Twitter, I did plug that we were going to be here tonight. So I think the 4 people that have started following me on Twitter know that this was occurring. I started out on Tuesday, so like this is all like very new. It's been in the works for a while, but still very new to actually getting it rolling.
And you're going to start streaming with Madden, right? I know.
Yeah, that's going to be the first game I do. Just I have another friend that he is started streaming. That's what we wanted to do. For anybody that plays Madden, if you look on Twitch, pretty much everybody streaming Madden is streaming the Ultimate Team game mode, which is basically collect cards, build teams. We like to play what we call fantasy draft franchises. They throw all the NFL players into a pool, and we draft our teams based on that. So it creates a lot of interesting storylines and different things going on that would actually be conducive to streaming, and that's why we're going to do it that way. But I'll also be playing games like Forza, like Brett said, Gears. About the only thing I'm not going to play is Fortnite and PUBG because there's too many people playing those games on Twitch. So I want to try to stand out a little bit.
That sounds pretty cool. Yeah, actually, sounds like a cool idea to do the fantasy football thing. And well, I guess that's it. Thank you everyone for listening, and again, thank you Ben for joining us.
Anytime.
When I talked to you. When I first reached out to you, I was like, well, it's got to be Dunk and Egg, you know? And
because I was the one that told you about the Dunk and Egg stories, wasn't I?
Yes. Yeah, actually Ben was. And it's funny because I actually tried to start a podcast with Ben and it kind of fell through, and it was just good to finally get you on because I know you were up to do it. It just never happened. But you can find us on Twitter and Facebook, and it's at Planetos Podcast on Twitter, and you just search the name for Facebook. You can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, YouTube, and any other platform that has the RSS feed that accepts that. You can email us if you have any questions. At planetospodcast@gmail.com. Also, the intro song is Jungo's Ballad, and that was by Dylan Rivas and myself. And if you want to, and we'll leave a link for any of his music. And the outro song is Smack, and that is by a band called Bleach Garden, and they're local to Atlanta. I've been one of your hosts, Brett.
And I've been your other host, Travis. See you around Planetos.